Today we're going to be exploring the life of Marvin Eder. He was one of the most freakishly strong natural bodybuilders to ever live. Just wait until you hear about his lifts. Some of them were so extraordinary that they could not be replicated until steroids came around to help. Even to this day, we have not seen another like him. All of this while also being fiercely anti-steroids makes Marvin a true legend of the iron game in my eyes. He achieved so much at such a young age, and just when it seemed like the world was his for the taking, Marvin's career would come to a screeching halt. I'm very excited to share this story with you guys because Marvin was one of the longest living Silver Era legends. So we actually have some recent interviews available, and we're going to be hearing the man speak for himself during segments of this video.
Look, when I was 70, I didn't need a door. I could walk through the wall.
We'll go through his feats of strength, we'll find out why his career ended so abruptly, and we're even going to hear Marvin's take on steroids and modern bodybuilding. Make sure to stick around for that because Marvin had one of the most brutally honest takes on modern bodybuilding you'll ever hear. So, dear friends, make yourselves comfortable and let me tell you the story of the great Marvin Eder. As always, let's start at the beginning. Marvin was born in New York in 1931. His family was impoverished and he grew up in a tiny, unsanitary apartment.
Apartment, if you could call it that, was actually almost like a hovel. Bedbug infested, roach infested, mice infested.
Marvin's father was also a compulsive chain smoker whose nasty habit ensured the already unpleasant apartment they lived in was constantly filled with smoke. Marvin was a very sickly child. He suffered from several illnesses, including whooping cough, polio, and rheumatic fever. Having survived all of that, Marvin was a weak, scrawny little kid and often got picked on by other boys. Hoping to get big and strong, Marvin started training at age 14. His family objected as they were convinced it would stunt his growth. But Marvin was determined, so he ignored their advice and began working out at a local park, doing pull-ups and dips. Eventually, just using his body weight was getting too easy for him, so he started paying other kids some pennies to hang on his legs while he trained. Basically, he started using other people as weights. He had no money, no gym, no equipment, but he figured out a way to get some serious workouts done and even progressively overload his exercises. Once Marvin saved up enough money, he joined New York's East Side Barbell Club to take his gains to the next level. I believe he would have been around 15 at this time. Here's a photo of Marvin at age 16, so probably after a year or two of serious training. We can see he already has the potential for a truly exceptional physique. Marvin made rapid gains training with proper weights at the gym. But his calisthenic background followed him and he continued to be a pull-up and dip specialist. With this, he not only gained size and strength, but also developed tremendous muscular endurance. Marvin could do 80 wide grip pull-ups in a row, and he once performed 1,000 dips in 17 minutes, which works out to just about one dip every single second for 17 minutes straight. He also trained other calisthenic movements like one-arm chin-ups, which he could do 8 in a row on each arm, and handstand push-ups, which he could do 25 in a row. So we haven't even gotten into any of the actual weight training, and I'm already getting mind blown by his calisthenic abilities. I would love to see a modern bodybuilder try some of this stuff. And just wait until you hear what else he could do. The guy really was the full package. Marvin's training at the gym was long and absolutely brutal.
Did every workout, I went my maximum. always trying to beat what I did before. That's how I trained. I never took a workout for granted. I had to do more and more.
His training sessions would drag on for hours and included a combination of calisthenic, Olympic, and bodybuilding exercises. Within just a couple years of training with weights, Marvin built up superhuman strength. Some even considered him to be the strongest pound-for-pound lifter of all time. Let's take a look at some of the ridiculous numbers Marvin had achieved in his early 20s. Keep in mind that all of these were at a body weight of under 200 pounds. His best bench press was 515 pounds. He was the third person in history to bench over 500 pounds and the first to do so at under 200 pounds body weight. He famously benched with a super wide collar-to-collar grip, which would not be allowed in a modern powerlifting competition, but really doesn't make the lift any less impressive in my opinion. 515 pounds is still a world-class bench even to this day. With my own eyes, I've only ever seen one guy bench this sort of weight, and the dude was about the size of my car, and on enough steroids that I was afraid of losing my natural status if I stood too close to him. So to be benching this kind of weight natural at under 200 pounds body weight is quite frankly almost unbelievable. And I'm not quite sure if there's anyone alive right now who could match it. But of course there's more. Marvin could do a dip with two large men hanging on his legs for a total added weight of 434 pounds. As far as I'm aware, this weight has never been matched, regardless of weight class or anabolic use. I did a little digging, and it looks like this guy, Matthew Zlot, has the best dip in the world right now at 430 pounds. So he's extremely close, and likely he will surpass Marvin's dip at some point, but as of the making of this video, it's possible that Marvin had the heaviest dip of all time. He was also a world-class overhead presser. He smashed the world record in his weight class by many pounds. Here he is pressing 330 pounds, and keep in mind that he had to clean this weight off the floor. And apparently he had very poor technique on the clean, so he likely lost a lot of strength before he could even begin the movement. Here's another photo of him split snatching 265 pounds. And the caption makes a note of his poor form, saying, quote, "Marvin Eder is one of the strongest light heavyweights of our time, but his style in the snatch and clean leave much to be desired because he has not trained them sufficiently to master perfect form. Lifters should learn perfect style before working for high poundages." I just find it funny how even with poor form on one of the most technical lifts, he was able to brute force throw a 265-pound bar from the floor straight above his head. Marvin was also regularly squatting 475 pounds for multiple sets of 10 deep reps. He trained quarter squats as well, which he did with a ridiculous 1,400 pounds on his back. He could strict curl 215 pounds on a straight bar, and he regularly did curls, tricep extensions, and seated overhead press with the heaviest dumbbells he had access to, which were 120 pounds. He even complained about having to do too many reps and was begging the gym owner to buy some heavier dumbbells.
I begged him to get 130 pounders, but he never did. I wanted to go up with even more because I was doing too many reps with them. I wanted to go up more.
There are many more crazy feats of strength attributed to Marvin, but I think you guys get the picture. Pat Casey, who was the first man to officially bench press 600 pounds, was quoted as saying, "In my opinion, Marvin Eder was probably the strongest man of all time." And pretty much everyone who saw Marvin perform seemed to agree. Now let's rewind a bit and take a look at Marvin's bodybuilding career. As you can imagine, all of this training built a tremendous physique. In his prime, he had 19-inch arms, a 49-inch chest, 34-inch waist, and 26-inch thighs. At a body weight of approximately 200 pounds and a height of 5 foot 8 inches. Listen to Marvin describing how densely packed his muscles were.
That I could dive into a swimming pool and walk along the bottom of the pool without floating up.
We saw the photo earlier of him at age 16. Well, he started competing in bodybuilding that same year in 1949. He entered and won the junior division of the IFBB Mr. New York competition, and he then came second place in that year's IFBB Junior Mr. America. The following year, in 1950, he won the IFBB Mr. Eastern America title, and he also competed in the Amateur Athletic Union Mr. America, but here he only placed 6th, after John Ferbotnik, Melvin Wells, Roy Hilligan, and others. In 1951, Marvin once again competed in the Amateur Athletic Union Mr. America, this time placing 3rd after Roy Hilligan and Malcolm Brenner. Here is an excellent photo of the top 3 from this competition. I'll tell you an interesting story from just before that Mr. America show. It was held in Los Angeles, and all the top bodybuilders were hanging out at Muscle Beach for a few weeks before the contest to train and get a tan. Some sort of quarrel broke out between Marvin and Doug Hepburn, who was also there for the weightlifting competition. Doug was an absolute mountain of a man, weighing over 70 pounds more than Marvin. The two decided to settle their dispute with a little competition. They started benching and quickly worked their way up to over 400 pounds. Marvin blasted out 2 reps with 420 pounds, which Doug also matched. Then Marvin did 1 strict rep on 430 pounds, which Doug also lifted, only to announce that he was just warming up. After that, Doug went for 440 pounds, but his form was so rough that Marvin commented, quote, "Nice lift, Doug. You must have lost 2 inches off your chest the way the bar bounced off your pecs." To which everyone laughed, except Doug, of course. Next, Doug strapped 2 45-pound plates together. He lifted them overhead with one hand and slowly lowered his arm until it was parallel to the ground. He held the 2 plates in this position for 5 seconds. Then Marvin grabbed the plates and held them for 10 seconds. Doug performed several other lifts, and Marvin went on to match them all. How amazing that this teenager was holding his own with a world-class weightlifter that weighed over 70 pounds more than him. One of the spectators to this epic showdown remembers it by saying, quote, "In all my years in the Iron Game, I've never witnessed such a glorious display of raw power and strength. I've seen dozens of world records set in powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, but nothing could compare to the Eder-Hepburn duel for sheer excitement." The young Marvin Eder was already taking the bodybuilding and strength world by storm. We are even fortunate enough to have some footage of him posing and doing muscle control. We can see just how thick his chest was. It seemed like nothing could stop him. He was only just getting started, right? Surely he would be the next Mr. America and maybe even make it to the Olympics with his supreme strength. Well, tragically, Marvin's bodybuilding and weightlifting career ended in 1952 when he was just 21 years old. To understand why this happened, we need some context. You see, around this time there was a war going on. Not between two armies, but rather between two Goliaths of the physical culture industry. We're talking about Bob Hoffman and Joe Weider. Both owned magazines, both sold weightlifting equipment and supplements, but most importantly, both of them were organizing bodybuilding competitions. Bob Hoffman through the AAU or Amateur Athletic Union, and Joe Weider through the IFBB or International Federation of Bodybuilding. Both of these organizations had their own separate Mr. America competitions, and Silver Era bodybuilders would often have to pick which one to side with. Our friend Marvin ended up somewhat of a pawn between Hoffman and Weider, but then Marvin appeared on the cover of Muscle Power magazine and Your Physique magazine, both owned by Joe Weider. Even though Marvin never got paid to appear in the magazine, apparently it really pissed off Bob Hoffman. So he set up a plan to sabotage Marvin. I'll read you some bits from an interview with Marvin so we can hear him explain what happened in his own words. The interviewer asks, "Is it true that because you appeared in a Weider publication that Hoffman said that you were a professional and thus ineligible to compete in the AAU?" To which Marvin replied, "Yeah, he made it possible for me to be thrown out and lose my amateur status. That's what Bob Hoffman did. Otherwise, I could have lifted in the Olympics." I remember I was giving an exhibition in his show, and he had someone walk out on stage and hand me a check for $15. That was the end. I lost my amateur standing. That's what Bob Hoffman arranged for. Also, he used to have the shows at York. He called it the York Picnic, and all the lifters used to come and do their lifts. Bob Hoffman invited me to his house for cake and coffee. I went there and he wanted me to betray Joe Weider, but I didn't do it. I refused to do it. And that was the end of that. They followed up by asking him, "But the reason that Hoffman used to disqualify your ability to compete in the Olympics was your appearances in Weider magazines." Marvin replied, "No, it was the $15. Like a jerk, I reached out and took the check. I appealed, but no way did they accept, and that was the end of that." Right, so basically Hoffman wasn't happy with Marvin, so he tricked him into accepting a $15 payment, which meant he could use it as an excuse to get him kicked out of the Amateur Athletic Union. Since he got paid for his work, Marvin was now a quote-unquote professional and no longer an amateur. Of course, this distinction in bodybuilding between amateur and professional was not much more than a technicality at the time, since plenty of AAU members were getting paid one way or another. The only difference was that they were loyal to Hoffman and Marvin wasn't. By getting kicked out of the AAU, Marvin wasn't able to compete in the Mr. America anymore, and he also wouldn't be able to compete in the Olympics. This absolutely devastated Marvin. He continued to train for a while and even set a new world record of 355 pounds in the clean and press in 1953. But sadly, it wouldn't be recognized. Disheartened, tired of the drama, and not seeing a future for himself in the sport, Marvin Eder decided to give it all up at the age of 23. Could he have become Mr. America? Mr. Universe? Could he have represented his country in the Olympics and maybe even won gold medals? We will never know. But what we know for certain is that some stupid internal politics and bickering between two businessmen cost us one of the greatest strength athletes the world has ever seen. After retiring from lifting, Marvin took up plumbing. From what I could tell, he applied a similar work ethic to his new craft because he actually became a master tradesman and ended up being one of the most sought after plumbers in New York. He did work for the likes of President Kennedy and John Lennon. He had quite a large crew working for him, and he was so good that other plumbing companies even hired him for consulting. So clearly he was a successful businessman as well. While Marvin stopped lifting for many years, all the manual labor kept him in decent shape, and he did start lifting again later in life. Marvin was a lifetime natural, and he was very critical of steroid use in modern lifters. Listen to this.
Unfortunately, the whole game has been poisoned by the use of these steroids.
Yes.
Every muscle man is using them.
Yeah.
Virtually everyone. I never, under any circumstances, used a steroid. Never.
Right.
I trained without that.
Now here's my favorite quote from Marvin. This is from an interview he gave when he was 75 years old. The horror of today is the use of all these chemical substances that's going on. It's so perverse. You know, when I lifted weights, I believed the stronger and more muscular I got, the healthier I became. Health was never divorced from my training. I would never, under any circumstance, consider the use of any kind of artificial drug to stimulate my muscle growth. What's going on now is a nightmare, an obscenity. And in a way, I hope the whole thing just disappears. That it should be wiped off the face of the earth, but it is just getting worse and worse all the time. A lot of these shows now honor men who built up their muscles with the use of chemicals. And just to be facetious, I said to a friend of mine, why don't they have a show called Mr. Chemical? It is an absolute horror now. And I will not lend my presence ever to any show, even if they were to honor me or anything like that. That is all in the past. I just want to stay away from it. Actually, when I begin to think of it, it is almost as if I'm becoming ill at the thought of even being near something like that. Eventually, these people will suffer. You cannot do that without destroying your body. Eventually, they come down with other forms of disease. You can't pour artificial testosterone into yourself and growth hormone and God knows what else without upsetting the natural homeostasis of your body. You will suffer from it. I really don't care what their goals are. You want to get muscular and stronger? Work out hard and look after yourself like I did. Man, this quote really resonated with me. You can just feel the pain in his words. Even though the industry treated him wrong, you can tell this guy had a deep love for natural bodybuilding. And I can only imagine how heartbreaking it must have been for him to watch the sport degenerate into what it is today. I seriously couldn't agree more with what he's saying, and I think he perfectly summed up modern bodybuilding. Mr. Chemical is exactly what they should call it. And I'm so glad that such a noteworthy bodybuilder had the balls to come out and tell it like it is. Mainstream bodybuilding has clearly taken the wrong path. What used to be a beautiful and healthy pursuit is now rotten and diseased. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm the crazy one when I see how normalized steroid use is nowadays. But Marvin was like a breath of fresh air. What has been going on in bodybuilding for the last 60 years is wrong, and I'm not afraid to say it. I don't care how many steroid users or bodybuilding fans I piss off. Come hell or high water, as long as I have a voice in this little corner of the internet, I will continue championing natural bodybuilding. And I will denounce steroid use every step of the way. Damn, sorry for that little rant. I actually came back to record this the next day because I just couldn't stop thinking about Marvin's quote. But Anyway, back to the video. In the same interview, 75-year-old Marvin said he was doing 500 crunches every morning and still regularly trained dips with a 75-pound weight, among other exercises. Marvin Eder passed away in February 2022, just a year before the making of this video. He was 90 years old and gives us another excellent example of the longevity that natural lifters enjoy. I believe he was the last living silver era bodybuilder. I find Marvin to be criminally underrated. The guy doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, for Christ's sake. Even though his career was short-lived, I believe he very much deserves a spot among the silver era legends. With this video, I hope to honor Marvin and maybe in some small way contribute to keeping his legacy alive. So my friends, that was the story of the great Marvin Eder. If you would like to support my research and get early access to these videos, check out my Patreon page linked in the description. And if you made it this far, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching.